Hello everyone and welcome to my channel Decipher Lab. After analyzing the study pattern in schools and colleges, I have decided to fill a vital gap in ethical knowledge. A student should also be ethically solid because in most real-life scenarios theoretical knowledge fails to keep you moving forward or to achieve success. In order to be successful, you must also develop a habit of reading books. Now I can understand what most of you must be thinking. I don't have much time or reading is boring. So don't worry about it because in this and upcoming videos I will be reviewing certain books and would be conveying the morals in the simplest way possible. The book I'm going to cover is Wisdom from the Ramayana, which is on life and relationships, and it is written by Kaikeyi-Manthara. Chapter 1. Kaikeyi-Manthara. Devastation by Disinformation, which means great destruction by false information. We are aware of the Ramayana story, how conspiracy led to the expulsion of Rama from his native place, which was of course a heart-wrenching event. From a devotional perspective, this incident brings forth the high spiritual emotion of love in separation. From the cosmic administration's perspective, it activates the chain of events that finally ended Ravan's reign of terror. And from an ethical perspective, it shows how even good people can get misled into doing terrible things. People with different intentions come into our lives and fulfill their selfish needs with a campaign of systematic disinformation. So this episode will help us combat disinformation. A mission of manipulation. This story unfolded in the city of Ayodhya, the capital of the kings of the Solar dynasty. The reigning monarch, Dasharatha, had ruled virtuously for many years. On seeing his old age approaching, he felt inspired to transfer power to a worthy successor, his oldest son Rama. To formalize this decision, he called an extended assembly of courtiers and leading citizens from various classes and conveyed to them his desire to transfer power. The assembly unanimously approved his decision. They resolved that the process for succession begin from the next morning itself. From this jubilant public setting, the Ramayana's spotlight shifts to a private setting inner chamber of the palace of Kaikeyi, Dasharatha's youngest wife. Due to her, Kaikeyi had become the king's favorite queen, displacing his senior-most queen, Kaushalya. Despite the inevitable tensions created by such a power shift, the overall family atmosphere remained cordial. Neither Kaushalya nor Kaikeyi bore any malice towards each other. Their respective sons, Rama and Bharata, as well as their two other siblings, Lakshmana and Shatrughna, sons of an intermediate queen Sumitra, lived in cheerful fraternal amity. This familial harmony was destroyed in one night during which a self-interested person launched a mission of manipulation. That dark instigator was an elderly hunchbacked maidservant of Kaikeyi-Manthara. This spinster schemster wanted to maintain, at all costs, her privileged position in the royal palace as the favorite maidservant of the king's favorite queen. If Rama became the king, she feared that his mother would become the foremost dowager and Kaikeyi would be relegated to the position of just another member of the royal family. This would downgrade Manthara to the level of just another maidservant. Due to her hunchback, Manthara had sometimes been the butt of friendly jokes. Though such teasing hadn't been malicious, she had resented it bitterly. Such banter had stopped with her ascension to a prominent position in the royal staff. Dreading return to a position of insignificance and scorn, she decided to use her wiles on Kaikeyi and somehow stop the transfer of power. Rushing to Kaikeyi's side with a scowl on her face, Manthara told her, "While you are sitting peacefully, do you know what is happening? Kaushalya's son, Rama, is going to be declared the regent tomorrow." Kaikeyi's face lit up in joy. "How wonderful! Here is A to you for bringing this joyous news." She handed her maid a jewel necklace. Flinging the necklace to the ground and scowling, "Even more," Manthara replied, "though you are the daughter of a king, how can you be so naive? Do you not see that this is a scheme to deprive Bharata of power?" Kaikeyi was used to her maid's sullenness. Rama is the eldest son. He is entitled to be the next king. Maybe after him, Bharata will become the next king. Manthara snorted, after Rama, his son will become the king. Once the kingship passes over to Kaushalya's son, it will never return to you. As Kaikeyi pondered her words, Manthara swooped down on her unsuspecting prey. If everything had been above board, why the haste to perform this ceremony when Bharata is not here? Actually, Bharata's absence was simply a happenstance. He was out of the station when the king felt an inner call to retire and promptly acted on it. Moreover, Bharata being the youngest son had no claim to the throne, which was meant to go by primogeniture to the oldest son, Rama. Such facts notwithstanding, Manthara exploited the happenstance of Bharata's absence to sow a seed of suspicion in Kaikeyi's heart. And then she watered that seed well into the night with dystopian tales up from her imagination. Once her son becomes the king, do you think Kaushalya will forget how Dashratha favored you over her? No. She will extract revenge by reducing you to her serving maid. And Rama will see Bharata as a threat. Finding some pretext, he will have Bharata arrested, maybe even executed. By the end of Manthara's diatribe, Kaikeyi became ready to do anything for stopping the conspiracy. Seeing her readiness, her maid suggested, "Do you remember the promise Dashratha had made to you long ago to grant you two boons? Now is the time to ask for them. Ask Bharata be designated as the royal heir, and that Rama be exiled to the forest for 14 years. Wanting that her scheme does not fail because of any soft-heartedness on Kaikeyi's part, Manthara added, the king will oppose Rama's exile. But don't go soft because of this. As long as Rama is in the kingdom, Bharata will not be accepted by the citizens as the king. Rama needs to be out of the kingdom for a long enough time so that Bharata can win them over. Hard heart breaks hearts. What followed was a collision between Kaikeyi's heart and Dashratha's heart. While the king's heart was soft at the prospect of the coronation, his queen's heart had become harder than stone due to believing the conspiracy theory. When their hearts collided, the impact left the king heartbroken. Late in the night, Dashratha finished overseeing the arrangements for the ceremony to be held the next day. Wanting to share his joy with his favorite queen, he came to her palace. When she reminded him of his past promise, he unsuspectingly reiterated his commitment to honor that promise. But when he heard her two wishes, he was petrified and collapsed in a swoon. On returning to consciousness, he realized that the nightmare was real. He strove feverishly to deter his wife from her ruthless resolve. Finally, he broke down into piteous tears and fell begging at her feet, both actions utterly characteristic of a monarch. Being bound by his word of honor, the king was forced to grant her wishes. But being horrified to see that his loving wife had become an unfeeling ogress, he disowned her. In a voice choked with agony and fury, he declared that the granting of her wishes, his obligation to her was over, as was his relationship with her. Despite hearing such a dreadful declaration, Kaikeyi still remained unrelenting. Her heart had become so cold and hard that it had no room left for anything except her scheme. No room for any conjugal affection for her husband. No room for any maternal affection for her stepson, Rama, who had accepted the grievous diktat against him with disarming grace. No room for feminine concern for her daughter-in-law, Sita, who had to don rough tree bark for joining her husband in his exile. No room for respect for the venerable royal priest, Vasishtha, who implored her to desist from such a nefarious plan. And no room for fear of public censure as the shocked courtiers and citizens condemned her. After Rama departed for the forest, the aggrieved Dashratha found separation from him unbearable. Even more agonizing was the thought that he himself had sentenced his son to exile. This sentence was reserved for the worst of criminals, being just one level below execution. And he had meted out that brutal sentence to one who had done no wrong, to one whom he should have protected, to one who had been born from his own blood. Crushed by anguish, Dashratha's broken heart broke down totally. He breathed his last soon after his son's exile. The whole kingdom sunk into the gloom at this double loss of both their cherished prince and their revered monarch. Imaginary Bharata versus real Bharata. Manthara has exploited fissures between convives to set off a catastrophic earthquake. That quake had now given rise to a tsunami that inundated the whole of Ayodhya with agony. Yet not one drop of that ocean touched Kaikeyi's heart. Her transmogrification from wise, kind, and gentle to foolish, cruel, and harsh was unbelievable. Given that she was not innately evil, how did she justify her horrendous actions to herself? By asking them in the garb of vigilant maternal concern. She imagined that she was doing all this for her son Bharata, who being absent couldn't protect his interests. She believed her maternal rationalization so completely that nothing else mattered to her, no one's words, emotions, or actions could dent her resolve. Yet her justification couldn't but crumble to powder when debunked by the very person it claimed to defend, Bharata. Kaikeyi's son had anxiously hastened to Ayodhya, being summoned by Vasishtha, who was officiating as the provisional head of state. On arriving in Ayodhya, he saw the once cheery city looking dreary, like a ghost town. Feeling deep misgivings, he rushed to his mother's chambers, expecting to meet both his parents there. On seeing his mother, he offered her his respects and inquired about his father's well-being. Kaikeyi recounted her own version of events, stressing how she had done so much to protect Bharata's right to the kingdom. Bharata was too sharp to fall for such spin doctoring. Hearing about his father's demise and his brother's exile left him shaken. Hearing that his own mother had caused these calamities left him stressed. Hearing her claiming that she had done all this for his sake left him sickened. He found his mother's words so revolting that he felt sorely tempted to violate the Kshatriya code that one should not raise one's hand against a woman. Somehow checking himself, he poured his fury out in words. Castigating his unrepentant mother, he deemed her an evil witch born for the destruction of their dynasty. Kaikeyi heard her son's denunciation with disbelief and dismay. In her imagination, she had fashioned a Bharata who lauded her actions. When the real Bharata condemned those very actions, she realized to her horror that the Bharata who lauded her was nothing more than her imagination. As that imaginary Bharata died a quick death, so did her rationalization. And the monstrosity of what she had done hit her with the force of 1,000 thunderbolts. She repented fervently, begging for Bharata's forgiveness. She even went with him to the forest to second his request that Rama returns and reclaim the throne. But it was too late. The Juggernaut had already gained fearsome momentum and nothing, not even its chief pusher, could not stop it. How did Kaikeyi become so misled? By a double blunder, she believed uncritically whatever Manthara told her, and she didn't seek any second opinion. She let herself be so persuaded by just one person's view that she rejected everyone else's advice. Don't just talk about others. Talk with others. As Manthara was for Kaikeyi, we too may have some people who seem to be like our well-wishers, but who end up coming between us and our actual well-wishers. In homes, meddling relatives sometimes come in between affectionate couples. In offices, an envious colleague may similarly come in between a team member and a team leader. By drawing an imaginary line between unconnected events and planting unwarranted suspicions in our hearts, such disinformers may paint a grim picture that we will soon be betrayed. Once our paranoia is triggered, we may end up becoming the betrayer, as Kaikeyi became. When someone casts an aspersion on a loved one, rather than believing the accuser, we need to give the accused a chance to clarify their position. A common blunder we make is that we often talk about people instead of talking with people. If Kaikeyi had talked with Dashratha as soon as the doubt had risen in her mind, things would have been amicably clarified and resolved. But instead of talking with Bharata, she talked about Dashratha with Manthara. Or rather, she let Manthara talk about him with her. And by hearing uncritically from Manthara, Kaikeyi's suspicion became a conviction. She convicted Dashratha in the court of her heart without giving him any chance to defend himself. She became the plaintiff, the plaintiff's lawyer, the judge, and the jury all rolled into one. Actually, the reality was worse. She was just a bystander who was persuaded to become a plaintiff and then to give the power of attorney to Manthara. And Manthara, acting as the plaintiff's lawyer, the judge, and the jury, convicted Dashratha as guilty, a verdict that Kaikeyi naively accepted. While it is easy to condemn Manthara and even Kaikeyi, it is more helpful to introspect about times when we ourselves might have acted like them and how we could have avoided or at least minimizes conflicts by seeking clarifications. A note of caution: clarifications need to be sought in a non-accusatory way. If others don't have any inkling of where we are coming from, then our voicing the suspicion itself may hurt them grievously. So, instead of making a value judgment of any kind, we can just present facts and seek explanations. If Kaikeyi had gently asked Dashratha why he was appointing his successor so hastily in the absence of Bharata, Dashratha would have explained how he had had jolting reminders of his mortality. And Kaikeyi's apprehensions would have been allayed without her needing to even voice them, leave alone act on them. In fact, hearing his concern might well have brought her closer to him at a spiritual level as they prepared together to accept the retired order of life. But instead of seeking clarification, Kaikeyi made a presumption about Dashratha's motivation, thereby bringing a calamity to the dynasty and on the kingdom at large. Instead of unwittingly bringing a similar calamity in our relationships, we can seek clarification by objectively presenting facts and gently soliciting explanations. Spiritual empowerment. As a broader strategy for protecting ourselves from disinformation, we need to strengthen our intellectual and ethical muscles. With stronger intellects, we can penetrate the actual beyond the apparent, thereby discerning the disingenuity in disinformation. With better ethical muscles, we can resist the promises of quick pleasure that disinformationists dangle to make us lower our guard. The process of Bhakti Yoga helps us strengthen both these muscles. A devotional study of scripture sharpens our discerning power and hones our intellectual muscles. Devotional remembrance of the Lord provides a higher inner fulfillment that empowers us to say no to lower temptations. Unfortunately, disinformation is so pervasive that it can distort our perception of Bhakti Yoga too. With a barrage of half-truths and untruths about spirituality and spiritual organizations, disinformation can assault our sacred faith. We can best protect our faith by entirely avoiding such anti-devotional propagandists. But if we somehow hear from them, we shouldn't let their opinions alone determine our spiritual decisions. By seeking clarification from trustworthy spiritual mentors, we can get a balanced understanding that protects our faith in Bhakti's potency. Disinformation threatens us not just externally but also internally. If we compare Ayodhya to our heart, then Manthara is like the mind. The mind comes up with the deadly duo of doubt and desire. Doubt paralyzes our devotion and desire aggravates our worldly infatuation. Being misled by the mind, we become like Kaikeyi and exile the Lord from our hearts. To counter the mind's insinuations, we need to meticulously avoid the two mistakes Kaikeyi made. Firstly, we need to avoid hearing the mind uncritically. Unfortunately, the mind is always with us, and it always has the opportunity to spin its self-serving yarn. So, we need to be constantly vigilant. Secondly, if the mind's persuasion starts swaying us from our moral and spiritual principles, we need to counter it with the enlightening voices of sacred texts and their saintly teachers. We can take both these precautions by conscientiously engaging ourselves in Bhakti Yoga practice. By such absorbing spiritual engagement, we will preempt the mind's misleading stratagems and will instead be led by timeless wisdom towards our all-around well-being. So this was the entire review of chapter number 1. I hope you have a lot to take away from this review. If you really liked my efforts, then help me reach more subscribers. I would really appreciate your valuable comments. Please hit the like button and do not forget to share. Thank you and stay tuned for the next chapter's review.